Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. This show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and whatever it is that we will be talking about. And my guest this evening is a repeat guest, Mike Hastie, who's been on before. I can say a whole bunch about him, but let's unfold here, and you experience him. He talked about Vietnam and things that went on in that period of time. And the last time, and we got such great feedback from the viewers until I wanted to have him on again to bring us up to speed with what's been going on since you were on the show the last time. And as you know, the show goes in two major segments. The first segment is what I call the bio segment, where I talk to Mike about who he is personally. You get an idea where he's coming from and how he got to be the way he is today based on how things from his childhood and school and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to do that in an abbreviated form because you've got so many photographs and so much things that you're going to talk about till I want to give enough time for you to talk about. And we were just talking about shutting our cell phones off, and I didn't, and you did, so I'm going to shut mine off now. You never know. All right, power off. Okay. Your name is Mike Hastie. Is that your name?
Yes, it certainly is.
How are you feeling right now?
Oh, I'm feeling good. I just appreciate you having me back on your program. I love the stuff that you're doing, and it's a pleasure to be here.
You were feeling kind of under the weather before the show came on a couple of days ago.
I think I was sick for about 4 days, and I just stayed in bed because I knew that I was going to be on the program, and I didn't want to push myself, and so that's what I did. I just stayed home. I had enough food in the refrigerator, and I haven't been sick for a couple of years, so I'm like you. I'm 70. I know you're a little bit older than me, but I think we both take care of ourselves. So I've been very fortunate that my health is very good.
Do you miss the martinis of your youth?
No.
I do. Yeah. If I would ask your best friend, who is Mike? What would your best friend say? Mike is what?
Well, I think I'm.
I pretend you're your best friend. Mike is what?
Mike is is committed to what he does. I think that I've heard him say that there is no rest for the messenger until the message has been delivered, and I think that's what Mike does. He's compelled, committed, and to tell his story because his story can benefit others who are struggling, and he gives a voice for those who are no longer alive and those who cannot speak. And so that's what I think that's what Mike Hastie does. And there's a quote from Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
And he makes a statement. He says that suffering ceases to be suffering when it has meaning. And I think Mike Hastie is, with all of the experiences he's had in his life, he has found meaning to his life by bearing witness and helping others.
Mr. Director, do we have 2 extra hours available here? Because the way Mike's going, we're going to need that time. You're a delight.
Oh,
I'm
thanks.
so glad you're here tonight.
You have a lot to do with that, Don.
Thank you. And when and where were you born?
Well, I was born June 20th, 1945. I share a birthday with Audie Murphy, if you can believe that.
Oh, yeah.
And I was born in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed General Hospital. My father was a career military officer, so my dad was stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. That's where my parents met, was in the Washington, D.C. area. Mm-hmm.
And you were the result of that marriage, and you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister that's 2 years and 9 months older than me, and we were delivered at the same hospital by the same physician. So.
Wow, what a memory.
Yeah.
Anything significant about your cultural or racial heritage worth mentioning or not?
Well, my last name is probably Irish, I have some German blood in me. I have some Italian blood, and also I'm 1/16 Native American. My ancestors were Snoqualmie, and though I don't usually bring that up as far as me saying that I'm a Native American, but I do have those roots, and I think they have probably spoken to me on many occasions, and what I do.
How did you learn about those roots?
My grandfather did an oral history, and he talked about it, and so he was able to track it down, and so that's how That's how my father. Basically, the story goes is that I had I think it was probably going back maybe, I would say it would have been about maybe 6th or 7th great grandfathers, but I had a grandfather that came over from Scotland. His name was William Glasgow, and he was a trapper, and he wound up in the Puget Sound area on Whidbey Island. And he was the first white man to settle on Whidbey Island, as far as the first white man to build a cabin and plant a garden. And he wound up marrying a Native American woman that was a...
Is this all oral history, or was this documented someplace?
It's documented, yeah. It's documented in some of the Washington State history books, and so, yeah.
What a remarkable memory.
Yeah, so I'm grateful that, for certainly the tape that he left, and the information, and being able to look in some of the history books and tracking that history down.
Mm-hmm. Religious preference? Do you have a religion or
well,
not?
I was baptized Catholic. I really wasn't raised Catholic. My father was Catholic, and my mother was probably, was from the rural area of Arkansas. She was born in a small town called Tuckerman, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And she got out of the South and wound up immigrating to the Memphis area, and then from Memphis to Washington, D.C. And then my dad, of course, was from Whidbey Island. And he was stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and they met in the Washington, D.C. area, because the distance between Fort Belvoir and Washington, D.C. is very close.
What kind of supplements are you taking to have this kind of a memory? I'm going to write it down. It's remarkable.
Well, you know what it is that I talk to my parents a lot about their history. I know my parents' history fairly well. I tape both of them. I think it's absolutely essential that that parents give that history to their children.
Yes.
It needs to be passed down to their to their grandchildren, great grandchildren, because I think grandchildren need to know where they came from. So often they really think of their history as starting with their parents, and they have no idea how their grandparents affected their parents. Certainly I did with my daughter. I've been married twice. I had a daughter from my first marriage, who then had 3 children. And and I just recently visited 2 of my granddaughters in Tampa just about a month ago. My grandson was unfortunately killed in a motorcycle accident.
Oh, too bad, yeah.
He and his girlfriend, about 3 years ago. So, like I say, it's just very important that the stories be passed down. And I think
that's an old Native American tradition.
Yeah,
too,
I think that's part of the problem with our culture, is that those stories aren't being passed down.
Yeah. And your formal education?
Well, I went to schools pretty much all over the country. I lived in Japan, Germany, East Coast, West Coast. I think there was a period where I changed schools 4 years in a row. I graduated from Pullman High School in Pullman, Washington, where Washington State University is located. My father got a degree there after he got out of the military. And then we moved to the Tri-Cities, which is the Kennewick, Pasco, Richland area. Mm-hmm. My father taught school, science and biology at Kennewick, Washington, and there's a community college there called Columbia Basin Community College, and I attended that school for a couple of years before I went in the military in March of 1969. Mm-hmm. And then when I got out of the military, I decided to go to nursing school, and I wound up going to nursing school at Good Samaritan School of Nursing in Portland, and I graduated from that school in 1979 with my RN.
So when you were in Vietnam, you were a nurse?
Well, when I was in the military, I went to a special school. It was known as a clinical specialist school. It was a 41-week course that I took at
41 weeks.
Yeah, in Denver, Colorado, and it made me eligible to take my LPN state boards in Colorado. So essentially, I had the equivalent of an LPN education when I was in Vietnam.
LPN meaning licensed
practical nurse. Yeah.
Okay, and that's what you did when you were there for the most part.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and you mentioned you were married twice.
Yes, I was.
You're not married now?
Nope, I've been single for 25, 30 years.
Are you available for a third time around?
Yeah, I'm like a baseball player. I don't know if I want to take the third swing.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends, and I enjoy, I certainly enjoy getting out and being with a lot of different people, men and women, of course. I have a really large activist community that I spend a lot of time with. So I work with a lot of people in that area.
Yeah, so your political persuasion, are you a supporter of Donald Trump or
No,
what?
no, I don't support Donald Trump. And it's hard. I really don't support any of the two political parties. I think if I had my wish list of who might be president, I don't know. I don't know whether it would be Jill Stein or possibly Bernie Sanders. I don't know, but it certainly wouldn't be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or any of the other Republican candidates.
Well, that's the whole buzz nowadays about those guys you mentioned there.
Yeah, I don't.
What a choice they encourage us to consider.
You know, I'm amazed. The Republicans just don't have a fast horse on a track. It's amazing that they haven't had anybody come through the ranks that can compete with, with a Hillary Clinton, because I think she's going to get the Democratic nomination, and that's what I feel like. I think she's good for Wall Street, and I think she's certainly definitely a Wall Street candidate. Who knows where Donald Trump's going to go? So we'll have to just see.
Well, dare I hope. I'm a Bernie supporter, but there are things about Bernie that I'm not pleased about. But you can't have everything, and so we can safely say that you're on the left somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'd say I'm a conservative radical. Maybe if you were to say that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, memberships in political, social, or civic organizations. Any come to mind for you?
Well, I think the main organization that I've been involved in for a number of years is Veterans for Peace. It's a national organization.
Yes.
Headquarters is in St. Louis.
I'm a member too, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got probably a membership of, I would say, around 6,000 nationwide. Mm-hmm. We have a group in London now, and we have a Veterans for Peace organization membership group in Hanoi, and so we're hoping to keep branching into other countries, and so. But that's been my main focus, is working for Veterans for Peace and all the things that I've done. I've traveled all over the country. I've been to Europe. I've been to Nicaragua. I've been to Palestine.
Under that banner, but
yes, right.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So. And I've been involved in a lot of demonstrations across this country and overseas, just trying to, talk about peace and justice and trying to stop whatever war that happens to be going on at this particular time. We've talked earlier, the United States has bombed about 30 countries since the end of World War II.
Since the end of World War II,
about 30 countries.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So we have a long history of bombing a lot of different countries. We have a long history of being involved in governments trying to destabilize their governments. I think we talked earlier. If people want to know what their country's doing, what the United States government is doing, simply go to your computer and Google history of U.S. military interventions around the world. That's all you got to do. And this is a list of countries the United States has been involved in, all the way from going back to Wounded Knee in 1890, when 300 Lakota Sioux were massacred. It was a list that was put out by Professor Grossman at Evergreen College in Olympia.
And Olympia, Washington.
Yeah, Olympia, Washington. And I have the list here. Like I say, it goes from Wounded Knee all the way to the war in Syria, and it's just page after page after page after page after page of countries that the United States has been involved in as far as trying to either militarily sending troops into, bombing, or trying to destabilize. And it just goes on and on.
We requested an extra hour. Looks like you better request 2 extra hours because of what Mike's got to talk about here. It looks, you're so thorough in your research and so interesting.
Well, it's just, it's just right here in black and white. I mean, I think a lot of people don't want to look at this history. I think part of the reason why is that, and we can get into this later on, but I think what happened to me when I went to Vietnam, when I came back, is that I realized that every aspect of the Vietnam War was a lie, and that what had happened to me is it dismantled my core belief system.
So let us pause there because I want to save this for the second half of the show.
Sure.
And one more question before we take a break, and then because you've got a ton of fantastic photographs.
Sure.
Persons from the past or alive today that you admired or look up to. Any names come to mind for you?
Well, obviously one, and I mean, there's been many. Muhammad Ali, certainly one. He's a man that I met in Portland in 1985. He was asked to appear at some boxing matches here in Portland, and he was there with his father and his brother Rockman. And I had a Leroy Neiman piece of artwork that he had done when Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier in the Thrilla in Manila. And I took that piece of artwork and I asked him to sign it. But before I went up and talked to him, I wanted to give him a message. I wanted to write something down on a piece of paper. So I went in the men's room at the gym, and I took a towel and a paper towel, and I wrote a statement. I just said, I said, my name is Mike Hastie. I was an Army medic in Vietnam, and I just want you to know that I really respect the fact that you did not go to Vietnam. And when I got up to meet him, I handed the note to his brother, and his brother put it in his pocket, and Muhammad Ali saw his brother do that, so he reached into the pocket and took it out of his brother's pocket, the note that I wrote. And then what I did is then told him what I had written on the note, and that I was, that I was very proud of the fact that he did not go to Vietnam. And he reached up and put his hand behind my neck and pulled me into him and hugged me, and I was the only person he hugged. And so
that's a memory.
Yeah, so I'll probably never forget that. And because he basically said that his greatest fight was the Thrilla in Manila against Joe Frazier, but he said his greatest accomplishment in life was not going to Vietnam.
Wow, that's incredible.
That means a lot to me. And so that was a very, very memorable experience for me.
I'm sure you've got more. So let's take a break now, Mr. Abe,
Sure.
and come back, and then we'll talk about what went on for you. And the photographs will say a lot.
Okay.
And you'll talk about them as you put them up.
Sure.
Break time. Well, we're back, and thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And my guest this evening, Mike Hastie, is going to talk about Vietnam and his adventures over there and a whole bunch of other stuff since Vietnam. And your life has been really interesting so far, just in the chatting, even before the camera started rolling.
True.
And again, I requested that we have so many more hours to follow up on the other stuff you're going to talk about. We're limited to 1 hour this time.
Okay.
Okay, so I have some questions that we want to talk about. Tell us about your background before you went into the military.
Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about it, and and there's one of the photographs that's up here is a picture of me that was me and my sister that was taken in Tokyo, Japan, in 1949. I was 4 years old.
I was in Yokohama then.
Really? Okay.
Yes, I was in the occupation.
Right. And my father was a career military officer. He was a captain at the time, and my father was was doing some very classified work for the government, for the military, and he was in the 29th Corps of Engineers in Tokyo, and what they were doing is they were making maps, and at the time, which of course I didn't realize this until years later when I found out that my father, his unit, what they were doing is that the U.S. military was flying B-24s and B-25s that were painted solid white, all insignias taken off, and they were putting cameras where the gun turrets were in the belly of the plane. And what they were doing is they were flying low altitude over Korea and China, and they were taking photographs. They were illegally flying into those countries. And then the film was brought back to my dad, and my dad's unit was then making maps that were given to American soldiers when we went into Korea. And one of the soldiers that received those maps was my father's younger brother, who was a second lieutenant combat officer in South Korea. And he told me that the maps were some of the best maps he'd ever seen. So he and I had that conversation actually the day that at my father's funeral in July of 1994, and I had that conversation with my dad's actually half brother. He was about 7 years younger. They had the same mother.
So with a military family background, you traveled a lot of places and lived in a lot of places and went to many different schools?
Yes, I did. I think in one period, I think I went to 4 schools in a row. I think it started, we went, when we came back from Japan in 1949, my dad seemed to be stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia quite a bit, which is, where my parents met in the early 40s. I think they met around 1939, 1940. And anyway, and then around 1953, my father got orders for Heidelberg, Germany, and he was a company commander over there. And so we were there from 53, 54, and 55. Then, so I left Germany, and my dad had 1 more year of service, and he got stationed at Presidio of San Francisco, and he retired as a major with 4 other full colonels, and so I did the 5th grade there at Argonne Elementary School in San Francisco, and then when my dad retired, we moved to Whidbey Island. And county seat of Whidbey Island is Coopville, where my father grew up.
And this is in Washington State?
Right, in the Seattle area. And I went to 6th grade at Coopville. And then my dad at that time became a student at Washington State University in Pullman. So my mother, myself, and my sister lived at Coopville. And then after we were there for a year, my father then brought us to Pullman. So the next year I did 7th grade at Pullman, at the junior high school there. And then I graduated from high school in 1963.
And you had college?
Yes, and then my dad retired, my dad graduated from Washington State University in the fall of 1963 and got a teaching job at Kennewick junior high school, and my dad taught science and biology for 16 years as a second career. And then they had a community college there, Columbia Basin Community College, and I attended that school there for about 2.5 years before I went in the military in March of 1969.
Did you volunteer for the military?
Yes, I did.
Why is that? Why did you volunteer?
You know, that's a good question. I think probably because I was very, very politically naive. I very seldom had conversations with people about Vietnam, and of course, you know, Vietnam had been going on for at least 4 years, and a lot of that had to do with that I just associated with a lot of friends that just didn't have that political awakening. Mm-hmm. You know, I spent a lot of time when I was going to community college in Pasco, which is where Columbia Basin Community College was. A lot of my friends were going to Washington State University. So I would drive up there every weekend because I was playing in a rock and roll band. I was a lead singer in a rock and roll band.
Singer?
Yeah. So I did that for about 3 years. And,
You've had a varied career.
Yeah.
So did you take a 4-year degree in college?
I eventually got, you know, when I went in the military, I had a couple years of community college, and then when I got out of the military, I went to another community college in Eugene. And then after I spent 2.5 years there, I got accepted to nursing school, and so I moved to Portland in the fall of 1976, and then I went to Good Samaritan School of Nursing for 3 years, and then I graduated there in 1979.
Why did you choose nursing?
Well, I think it was a good fit. After having been a medic in Vietnam, I had a lot of training in the military. And it just seemed like a good fit. And also, my sister was a registered nurse, and I think I think I got influenced by her when I went in the military to pursue the medical field.
In the military, why did you choose a medic, being a medic, instead of an infantryman or a radioman?
Well, I think I wanted to help save lives instead of take lives. I think that.
I was the same way when I volunteered.
Yeah.
I was in the medics the entire time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I just seemed
and
like
I'm
a good
also a
fit for me.
recovering Catholic too. We have a couple of things in common. So, and when you left Vietnam and you came back, what was it like when you came back from Vietnam?
Well, I think. You know, I'm part of maybe I might talk a little bit about why, you know, what I did there.
And you're going to use some of these photographs.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, and then and a lot of the stuff will come out when I talk about it. But when I was stationed in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, in an area called An Khê, and I was attached to the 4th Infantry Division, and I was in a unit. It was the first Squadron, 10th Cavalry. That was attached to the 4th Infantry Division. Our primary objective was to keep a highway open for convoys and traffic. So we had a reconnaissance support base with assault helicopters, and then we had 3 fire bases with heavy artillery. Mm-hmm. And so that was my main job was I was the chief medic in my unit, and so you got to remember by 1970, 71, which is when I was over there, we were seeing the rapid disintegration of American involvement in Vietnam. So I was seeing the homicides, the suicides, the rampant heroin addiction, shootouts. I was seeing basically an American military that was falling apart.
And you said you were seeing there. Were you involved in caring for the wounded?
Yeah, we would get occasionally we would get hit. We'd have dust-off helicopters, bringing in some of the wounded. And I was, I was taking certainly care of people that were involved in some shootouts. There was some suicides in my unit, and we would occasionally get hit by a rocket or a mortar or a sapper attack. I remember one night I was on a bunker and a sniper round went over my head. So we were not seeing mass casualties like they were seeing in 1968, but we were getting hit every once in a while. And so when I left my unit in September of 1971, my next duty station was at Fort Hood, Texas, and I was attached to the 1st Infantry Division there, and the first air cav, and I worked at Darnall Army Hospital in the emergency department because I'd had all that experience in Vietnam. So I worked there for about 2 or 3 months. I got an early out because a lot of units were deactivating, going back to the United States. So I got a 6-month early out of the military. And so I got discharged in March of 1972. So I was in the military, I think, for about 3 years and 11 months. Mm-hmm. And then I decided to go move to Oregon because I knew there was a community college in Eugene. And so I was interested in pursuing nursing.
Did you have any lingering effects from being in Vietnam all this time?
Yes, I did. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that, and we touched on this a little bit before, a lot of people have this idea that PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is just strictly related to heavy combat in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And that is not true. No, I certainly had my experiences in Vietnam, but one of the things that's so important to talk about Vietnam is moral injury. Uh-huh. And I think that for me, the biggest moral injury I had was the absolute realization that the entire Vietnam War was immoral. We should have never been in Vietnam.
I've never heard the term before, moral injury.
Yes. And I think that's what happens with so many vets that come back, and that their core belief system is dismantled. And that certainly happened to me. It took a few years before that really started to happen. Like I say, I graduated from nursing school in 1979, and I think I started really experiencing my PTSD symptoms probably around 1980, 81, 82.
But it was a while before.
Yeah, it took me a while, and I think that, so much of that is suppressed, and I when I came back to the United States, a lot of things just didn't make sense to me anymore. I often say I felt like I was in an emotional whiteout. I felt absolutely betrayed by my government as far as them sending me to Vietnam for a cause that was never just. We could have never won the war in Vietnam, and the reason why is because the vast majority of the Vietnamese people who lived in South Vietnam did not support the puppet government that we put in power.
A puppet government?
Yes, we should have. And I think that's the war was launched on a lie. It was launched on the Gulf of Tonkin, which was, the United States claimed that North Vietnamese torpedo boats fired on the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin. And of course, those things never happened.
But that was the pretext that they used,
right?
Because they wanted to go in and stop the spread of communism.
And what's interesting is that when the French were defeated in Vietnam in 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, basically what happened is the baton was passed to the United States, And
Mike,
then
we've got 20 minutes left, and you've got a whole.
Let's get into this. I'm glad you stopped me.
Okay.
Anyway, this picture here, of course, like I say, is me in a kimono with my sister in Tokyo, Japan. The first photograph that I'm gonna spend probably just maybe a minute or less on each photograph. This was an image I took. This was a recruitment poster, Uncle Sam. It was an actual recruitment poster that I found in a store. It was a 1968 recruitment poster. What I did is I had the image, Uncle Sam image, superimposed over the names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And then I simply wrote at the bottom here, I said here, lying is the most powerful weapon in war. And this next image is an image that I've used at the beginning of my essay, and it just obviously says all photographs taken by Mike Hastie, Vietnam veteran. And then under it I wrote, when the intellect can no longer censor the soul, the truth is born. This is a man, he was a Marine at Quezon in 1967-68, saw heavy combat, saw a lot of his buddies get killed, and he was at the moving wall that was in Salem, Oregon in 1989 at the fairgrounds, and I took that photograph. He had just gone through and looked at a lot of the names of certainly buddies that he lost.
He looks kind of Vietnamese.
He looks, he's Native American. He's a Native American. He was talking to this woman, and he basically broke down and started crying.
Okay.
And this is an image. This next one is a picture of a medic that was in my unit. His name was Ed Tenberg. He was, it was just a typical shot. I got interested in photography when I was in Vietnam, and it was just a candid shot I took of him one night.
What do you imagine is going on in his mind or in his heart at that time?
Right. The next picture is a friend of mine. His name is John Jacob Lowe, full-blooded Creek Indian from Henrietta, Oklahoma. He spent 2 years. He spent 2 tours in Vietnam. He eventually, about a year ago, he died from Agent Orange exposure. And under it, I simply wrote, and you can see it, I said, the magnitude of my illness is equal to the depth of my silence. And that's what PTSD is. That's what happens when people don't deal with their PTSD. So I use this photograph a lot to really talk about the wounded emotions that happen with every vet.
What percentage of the Vietnam veterans do you think get over PTSD or get to manage it enough where they have a halfway normal life? That's a tough question.
It's a tough question. I would say the vast majority don't recover from their PTSD. I mean, they can function in society, but as far as dealing with their deep-rooted pain and their wounds, I think most of them carry those the rest of their life. And they just live their life as best they can. And certainly there are a lot that have recovered from PTSD. I've met many vets that have, but I've also met more vets that have not.
So since Vietnam, the involvement America has had around the world in different countries, and the American boots on the ground, those troops come back home and they experience PTSD and all those kinds of symptoms because of their involvement in killing other human beings, and especially when it's unjustified.
Yes.
So it's ongoing. We have a whole part of American society that are experiencing PTSD to one degree or another.
Okay, that's very true. This was the platoon sergeant that was in my unit.
It's a cavalry patch. Isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah, it was. It was a First Field Force patch. Yeah, and that's one of the patches that I wore. Anyway, he was from Harlan County, Kentucky. This is a picture of a man. His name is Dan McMahon. He was a medic, and this was a picture that I took of him with his camouflage, paint that he had on, and what happened was a few days after this picture was taken, he was inserted on a helicopter because there was a 6-man team that was ambushed in the field, and anyway, when he got off the helicopter, one of the soldiers that was right in front of him was shot, and he was shot and was killed in that, and the AK-47 round hit him in the head and killed him instantly. And I remember the day that they brought his body back to our unit, and there was about 3 helicopters that were used to insert about 15 to 18 of the soldiers in to help the 6-man team that got ambushed, and Dan was one of those people. And
so those are the kinds of things that occur that cause you to have PTSD.
Yes, it is, for sure. This is a dust-off helicopter that was in my unit. As you can tell, someone had simply, the crew had just painted Y on the front of the helicopter, as in, why are we there? And this was, this image has been on the internet quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
The next image is a Vietnamese woman that I took a picture of that was working on one of our bases. I don't remember her name.
What kind of camera were you using?
I was using a Miranda camera.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. This is a picture. Her name is Juan, Hoan. She came to the U.S. with a Agent Orange delegation, and they're trying to get reparations for Vietnamese who suffered from Agent Orange. She's a third-generation victim of Agent Orange. This picture was taken in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This was a veterans building that was located in Pittsburgh. We went to it because the person that was kind of in charge of the delegation wanted to show the Vietnamese that were on the delegation a particular piece of artwork was there.
What happened to her legs and her left hand?
Well,
Agent Orange.
She was born with her parents were affected by Agent Orange, and she was born with no arms and no legs. And I asked her if she would step back into those American flags while I took a photograph of her, and I think the picture just simply speaks for itself.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people like that.
Yes, there was
Agent Orange.
Many. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese were affected by Agent Orange. This is a woman I took a picture of that was at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in 1986. She found a name on the wall and just simply started breaking down. There's a quote under it by William Broyles Jr. He was a Vietnam veteran. He just simply wrote here, "Those who come to the wall become part of it. They touch it, rub it, sing to it, pray against it, and they talk to it. The wall is like a character in a play whose silence makes all the other characters speak." Next image is a picture of a high school football team that I took, and I superimposed it over the names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I just simply called it average age 19. 58,000 American soldiers were killed in Vietnam. Their average age was 19, from the senior prom to Vietnam. Next picture is the two vets that were at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Portland. It was taken about 10 years ago. This veteran here is comforting this veteran as he broke down after the ceremony there on Veterans Day. So, and this is an image that I really care a lot about.
Yes.
This is a picture of a M60 machine gun that was on a armored personnel carrier, and basically what this is it's 19-year-old boys being spit out of a machine gun so the rich could get rich in America, because we all know that war is about profit. And so, and I wrote here, I said, 19-year-old American boys being spit out of a machine gun so corporations in America are able to become unfathomably rich off of a war economy. This is the lifeblood of their blood in the U.S. empire. This is a picture right here that was taken at the infamous ditch at My Lai. I went to the My Lai massacre site in 1994 when Lieutenant Cowley went in with a number of American troops, and they massacred 504 innocent civilians. And this was the ditch where about over 100 innocent Vietnamese were murdered by American soldiers.
Okay.
Which time?
Yeah, okay.
This is an image that was a painting depicting that scene of American soldiers murdering the Vietnamese civilians in that ditch. This is a picture of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial that I took in 1986. Interesting comment. This was written by Philip Joynes Griffiths. He was a very famous photojournalist in Vietnam. He simply makes a statement here. He says, "Everyone should know one simple statistic. The Washington, D.C. Memorial to the American war dead is 150 yards long. If a similar monument were built for the same density of names of the Vietnamese who died on it, it would be 9 miles long." So on that Vietnam Veterans Memorial is the names of 58,000 American soldiers were killed. If the same density of names were used on the wall in D.C. for the Vietnamese, that wall would be 9 miles long. That's how many people we killed in Vietnam.
And America is proud of its military history.
Yes. This is a picture that was a sign that somebody left, a card, it was like a 3x5 card, and it just simply said, in memory of Robert M. Brenton, he did not die in country, but as a result of being there. This is an image here that I took. This was a gun shop that was taken in Newburgh, Oregon. I took this about 20 years ago, and it just, you know, it speaks for itself. I will quote Martin Luther King. At the bottom, it just says, "The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government." And he gave that speech at the Riverside Church in New York City on April 4th, 1967, and on April 4th, 1968, he was assassinated.
So some would say that that same thing can be said about what's going on today, the greatest purveyor
Yes,
of violence.
no question about it. This was taken at a fairgrounds in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho in 1999. There was military recruiters putting war paint and camouflage on small children. And there was happened to be a flip chart in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And I simply had a friend of mine in calligraphy write child abuse on it. That's just kind of how I feel about it.
Yes.
This is an image that was taken of a small boy at a Veterans Day parade in Albany, Oregon. I was taken probably around 1993, 94. He was on a flatbed truck with other boys. They all had plastic guns and rifles and pistols, and this boy simply posed for me, and I took this picture of him. And on it I wrote, "Every time you buy a boy a violent toy, you trample his soul." This is an image that speaks for itself.
Sometimes I rotate these a little bit
Okay.
to do something with the reflection.
You know,
See, now that's better.
You know, 22 veterans commit suicide every day in this country. Those are VA statistics.
Yeah.
And the number of veterans that are put on medications to treat their PTSD is just unbelievable. The amount of medication that some veterans, veterans are on. And this is a picture of a G.I. Joe figure that's face down on my bed, and I simply actually there's 14 pill bottles around him. And it's interesting, I showed a photo essay in New York City about 7, 8 years ago, and there was a Marine, an ex-Marine, that was looking at this photograph, and he started counting the bottles. He says, "It's 14. He says, "That's how many the VA put me on when I got out of the Marine Corps." So it was interesting when he made that comment.
So you're no longer a normal human being anymore after you take these for a long period of time.
This was a man that was simply at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Portland on the day that it was dedicated. I think it was dedicated in 1988, I believe. 87 or 88 that the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated in Portland. And this was the day it was dedicated. It was pouring down raining. This is a Vietnam veteran that was on crutches, and I just happened to, get a candid shot of him.
What a shot.
This is a picture of a homeless veteran in San Francisco. I took that in 2003. And I had a conversation with him afterwards. We talked a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
This is a picture that I took of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. I took this in 1986. I was very fortunate to get this picture. For some reason, this 5 or 6 year old little girl was walking along the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Actually, in the original negative, there's 6 segments of the original. There were 6 segments of the wall in the original negative, and here there's only 4, but there was originally 6. She's the only person in the photograph. Evidently, her parents were somewhere down, looking at names on the far end of the memorial. And for a very brief few seconds, what she did is she stooped down, she looked up at the names, then she stood up, and then she closed her eyes, put her hands to her side, and I took the photograph. And I had a camera with a telephoto lens.
You think she was sensing something?
Yes, I don't know. I could have sat there and taken photographs for 10 years and not got this photograph. I will quote a veteran friend of mine. His name is Nicholas James Weber. He's a good friend of mine that served in Vietnam in helicopters. He wrote this. He's a great poet. He just simply said, "As God walks atop this wall and weeps, I hear him say, 'These were my sons, The sound of his tears falls silenced as hands are washed in the Potomac, and it runs red with waste. The Pontius Pilates of the new Rome repeat history on full automatic. And that is about the United States being in the Middle East.
So
We've simply moved Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. We've just simply moved those wars to the Middle East.
Is the American empire crumbling?
Yes, no question about it. You cannot spend 50% of your tax dollars going to the military-industrial complex and not have the American people get their social needs met. You know, I think it was Martin Luther King that made a statement. He says, a nation that year after year spends more money on military defense than it does on programs of social uplift is facing spiritual death. He made that statement in 1967 when he spoke at Riverside Church in New York City. This is a banner that these people were holding. It just simply says, the U.S. has bombed 28 countries since the end of World War II. I took this at Pioneer Courthouse Square about 2 weeks ago. And the man on the right is holding a sign that says, 25 years too long, U.S. out of Iraq.
I know him, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good picture.
Yeah.
You could probably see more clearly what you're talking about if you glance at it.
Yeah. This is I really like this photograph. Of course, now it's more like 30 countries now instead of 28. And so anyway, this is a photograph I took. Actually, I was in a store that sold movies, videos, and DVDs and everything. And there was a poster advertising the film American Sniper. Okay. And I happen to have a shirt on that on the front, it's something I wrote and I put it on the shirt. It says, when politicians and the rich start sending their kids to war, I'll start believing in noble causes. And so I had a friend of mine take a picture of me standing by the poster. This was taken about a year ago. I'm going to read something by Dalton Trumbo, who wrote the book Johnny Got His Gun, which is one of the greatest anti-war novels ever written. This is what Dalton said. He says, and he was writing about World War I. You can certainly apply it to certainly Vietnam, what's happening in the Middle East. He says here, if the thing they were fighting for was important enough to die for, then it was also important enough for them to be thinking about it in the last minutes of their lives. That stood to reason. Life was awfully important, so if you're giving it away, you ought to think with all your mind and your heart. You ought to think with all your mind in the last moments of your life about the thing you traded it for. So did all these kids die thinking of democracy and freedom and liberty and honor and the safety of the home and the stars and stripes forever? You're goddamn right they didn't. Probably one of the greatest quotes I've ever come across, and I have that on the back of my card that I give out. So this is a photograph that was taken in Santa Barbara, California. This is the every Sunday there's a memorial that's put up on the beach. These are all American soldiers that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Every white cross represents one soldier that was killed, and every red cross represents 10 American soldiers that were killed in either Iraq or Afghanistan. I took this, I believe, about 3 years ago, and it's right on the beach, as you can tell in the background, people on the beach. There was a sidewalk that ran right kind of in front of it, and a woman walked by, and she had a shirt on with a logo on the front that said "Obey." And when she walked by, I thought, God, I wish I could get a picture of her standing in front of those crosses. So I decided to go ahead and approach her, and I asked her if it was okay if she might stand in front of those crosses while I took a picture of her. And that's exactly, that picture, as far as I'm concerned, speaks for itself. These kids that go to war, they do not know why they are there. They have absolutely no idea why they're there. They do not realize they're serving the corporate rich. That war is about unfathomable profit. The last picture I will show is This is
Perfect timing.
This is an image I put together. This is obviously a chessboard set. In the background, it shows the chess pieces up, and what I did is I wrote I wrote on each chess piece a name of a country that the United States has bombed or sent military troops into. One is, of course, we'll start here off to the back row on the left. Going right, Honduras, Iraq, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Vietnam, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Cambodia. In the front row, Libya, Somalia, Iran, Lebanon, Laos, Syria, Egypt, Yemen. And of course, there's certainly a lot more chess pieces that you could add. And then I took these small little toy vehicles and I put them on the other side of the chessboard. And what I did is I simply wrote here, the United States government positions itself on the global grand chessboard of international politics.
Okay, we're going to have to stop now because they're going to yell at me if we don't. This has been delightful and exciting, and we need 3 more hours.
Oh,
again.
I know. I got a lot of other stuff we could talk about, but we got a lot covered in an hour, and I really appreciate that. Don.
I am so
really, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you very much.
So much
Bless
for
your heart.
coming. And we're going to have you on again sometime in the future.
I'd love to.
If you take a breather. What an exciting adventure that we've had here with you coming here and talking about what you're talking about here, because it speaks to me and from my sentiments and my point of view and my being a nonviolent person and a lot of other reasons too, but we're simpatico. So shall we do okay, I got to tell you about the American Civil Liberties Union. Join the ACLU because American civil liberties are in jeopardy now, particularly with the Supreme Court we have going on now. We've got to protect our civil liberties because they're really in danger of disappearing completely. And we've got to end corporate personhood to take back our country. Go to www.movetoamend.org to see about joining. Thanks for watching. Remember KFC, kind, friendly, and charitable, and not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Now kind, friendly, and charitable. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.